Sanskrit demonstrates that words have power, that we hold the power to shape our reality by the words that we choose, speak, and embody. Sanskrit is nature's code. It's an inside-out experience of sound vibration, sounds that are naturally produced from within the body. It's an organic experience that carries the purpose of awakening consciousness. Welcome to the Prana and Poetry Pod, Season 3, Episode 2, Sanskrit and Decoloniality. As much as I wish to focus on my love and joy of learning Sanskrit, I can't help but feel the thick ball in my chest and throat, the pain and weight of oppressive systems and ongoing ethnocide. I want to focus on re-indigenizing and centering the Indigenous experience and everything that is right about it, rather than decolonize and speak of what is wrong. I always begin with the intention and desire of wanting to express the joy and love of my culture and ancestral knowledge. But being from the Indian diaspora, there's things we just can't unsee and can't unexperience. The weight of coloniality is very strong, being born away from one's dharmic land and living within and from the systems which terrorized and oppressed it and its people. It's a different kind of agony and despair. Especially being involved in and working within the Western yoga industry, I am frequently activated by outsiders of the culture taking liberties and distorting cultural knowledge whilst presenting themselves as the authority of that cultural practice. It's a circus, quite frankly, and it's hurtful. So much grief arising from the need for cultural reclamation. It has become fashionable now for brainwashed zombies to dehumanize Hindus who speak up, speak their truths, or defend their cultural knowledge or practices. It is also a trend to ridicule us for simply minding our own business and celebrating our festivals and rituals, which are all tethered to Sanskrit. Learning Sanskrit is again another healing journey, not just for myself, but for all who have been colonized. Practicing and reciting Sanskrit each day as part of my yoga sadhana is an experience of awakening darkness, awakening numbness from within the body, awakening from being silenced. The swaras and vyanjanas, the vowels and consonants, are the sounds of Prakriti. It comes from within the body and from nature itself. Uttering these sounds is a practice of embodiment. The English language, for example, is phallocentric. It is designed to numb and oppress and limit vocal expression. The saying of being stiff upper-lipped holds a truth, because it is inherently misogynistic and designed to oppress anything connected to nature, especially the body of women. Sanskrit, on the other hand, liberates the colonial mind and body and the ideologically oppressed person. It's the language of the universe. It is sound vibration. So, of course, Western academics trained in phallocentrism and Orientalism must concoct a theory of Hindus needing to be saved from their barbaric nature-based practices, and of course they must create this new section of studying the native, putting their sacred speech under microscopes, separate it from its inherent genius and sacredness, separate Sanskrit from its divinity, and call this hinduphobic field Sanskrit studies. What a joke. Then individuals from this academic field, or any individual from outside of the culture who has studied Sanskrit from an etic view, or the outsider's lens, are then invited to teach Sanskrit at yoga teacher trainings, giving wrong information to eager students who may actually have a sincere desire to learn. Story time, I was part of said teacher training that hired said outsider of culture, and who, I kid you not, said Sanskrit is a dead language and is not used at all. What? Of course I had to speak up and say, actually, I grew up with Sanskrit in my household, listening to daily pujas and bhajans. I said that we use Sanskrit in our ceremonies, like weddings and funerals. The said teacher just did not have a reply. There was just silence in the room. and it made me look stupid. It was weird. Anyway, I was taught the Gayatri Mantra from lineage teachers at a young age, which I and many Hindus recite daily. There's even a village in India, Bharat, where Sanskrit is spoken as the official language. Sanskrit is used in all rituals and ceremonies, of which we Hindus have many throughout the days, the weeks, the months. I could not believe what we were being taught. And yet, guess what? My voice didn't matter. I even addressed the mispronunciations of Sanskrit words within the training of postures, and I was ignored in front of the class. The reply was, "Well, my teacher taught me to say it this way, so I'm going to continue saying it this way." Okay then, if a white person taught you it, it must be the word of God. Why is a person belonging to the culture itself not given value, recognized, heard, or respected? We are always being silenced in our own cultural practices, and would you believe, in our languages. This is the colonial mentality of knowing better than the native, of wanting to teach the native their own traditions, but in corrupted forms. Believe me, I found my voice, and I ask now, why do you not hire native Sanskrit teachers? Why are native Sanskrit teachers not being paid to teach at your institutions and in your programs? Why are you afraid of their power, of their truth, of their voice? I invite you to confront the shadow of colonial theft and the desire to center whiteness at all costs. Why do you uphold the supremacy of your colonial ancestors? Decoloniality is being honest and returning power and voice to where it belongs. Why aren't you tired of destruction, damage, violence, and lies? How many times must we tell you that harm is being done in return for your profits? And don't get me started on the Marxist lie that Sanskrit is oppressive and held in the hands of a few. Do you hear yourselves? Do you not see the harmful effect of superimposing the Western historical lens onto dharmic traditions? When you are rooted in Dharma, on the other hand, in nature, rooted in your yoga sadhana, your consistent practice, which is between you and your inner consciousness, your inner being, perception becomes clearer. As Hindus from the diaspora, we're certainly very tired. And I've noticed the awakening happening within the Hindu consciousness, and about time. After over 1,000 years of abuse and terror, finally there is an awakening to uphold and protect Dharma, especially now in turbulent political climates. Sanskrit is part of Dharma, Hindu Dharma, Sanatan Dharma. If you don't engage yourself in the source community, how will you know that you are harming? The disconnect is so apparent with white yoga teachers and those who position themselves as authorities in knowledge that is of someone else's culture, and only after reading a few books, along with having no discernment of authentic and credible sources. The butchering of Sanskrit in yoga classes and festivals and other spaces where indigeneity is parroted, the playing of butchered mantras and chants, for example, Vedic chants and mantras which are not meant to be sung with a pretend Indian accent in unison with drums and guitars. I can't tell you the cringe and pain that I experience from this level of ignorance. The double standard of Indians and Hindus being policed on using Sanskrit or even our sacred Om chant in Western yoga classes, yet white teachers having free rein to cosplay our culture. Can you try and imagine the audacity and outrage that we feel at being silenced? This is why I have created my Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit. I've painstakingly gathered books, articles, podcasts, from Indigenous sources to help the sincere, spiritual, and ethical practitioner unlearn the colonial and supremacist mentality towards Vedic and Dharmic culture. You too can start to call out the harm and distortions that you see and support us in centering the emic view, the Indigenous perspective. On the other hand, the etic approach studies the indigenous culture with a destructive, political and dominant or supremacist gaze. Colonial or post-colonial, it cannot rid itself of its biases and reductive theoretical approaches that originate from its troubled and violent, if not sadistic, past and histories. My question is, why would you not go to the source of the culture to ensure you're learning Sanskrit from its stewards and learning from the correct context? Would you not want to take an emic approach and learn from inside the culture? This goes for yoga too. What are you gaining by continuing the exploitation of our culture and the continuing of passing on wrong teachings and mispronunciations? I'll give you the answer only because I'm truly fed up at this point. The colonized body is holding on to power, holding on to an illusion of power. That lie that you know better than the culture itself. This comes from the predator within, this desire to take, to steal, to claim ownership in order to survive the wound within the harmful power dynamics of colonialism and whiteness, that racial construction that gives you unearned privileges, and the legacy of the need to position yourselves as authorities in someone else's culture so you can feel something. So you can feel something. This need to feel is where the shadow resides, where the wound is, the cut, the severance, the disconnection of body, mind, and spirit with nature. This centering yourself masks the disembodiment and lack of empathy which resides within the colonial psyche and the mental disease of narcissism. Why is it that those who make the effort to understand the living culture of the Vedas, the ones who are humble and listen to the indigenous voice, seem to be the only ones who can pronounce Sanskrit? And I want to be clear that anyone can achieve this level. One only requires effort and consistency of practice. There's not a single popular yoga influencer or dharmic practitioner or practitioner of Vedic knowledge that can pronounce Sanskrit. And I'll explain the importance of pronunciation later. There's not one outsider of the culture who purports to be an authority that I have encountered in online spaces who can speak Sanskrit like a native. They may think they sound like a native, but trust me, we know. We can hear the lack of training quite distinctly. This demonstrates a lack of practice and effort, a lack of care. It shows me their teachers were not indigenous, or they stopped their studies with a native or lineage teacher early. Not learning from a native person who is rooted in their traditions is a recipe for passing on wrong teachings. Firstly, a native teacher understands the transcendent quality of Sanskrit, as well as its systematic structure and scientific essence. They understand the nuances of context and the vastness of meaning. They don't have an agenda like those coming from an etic viewpoint. The indigenous holders of lineage have an intention to preserve and teach authentically. They understand that Vedic Sanskrit chanting, for example, has many nuances. It is a precise form of art and science. When it comes to reciting these, there are just 3 swaras or notes, and the mantras are therefore not to be sung but chanted, let alone sung with guitars and drums and other instruments, mixed with ecstatic dances. Goodness gracious me, the cringe and horror, the disrespect and ignorance of it, when all they have to do is go to authentic sources to learn before parading around and cosplaying indigeneity and making a mockery of our sacred sounds. Also, the audacity to think that you can take and chant what you like, again not even being aware that some mantras are given by a guru only, and one must have been given the adhikar, one must be capable and qualified to chant and recite certain specific mantras and even be given the blessings of a teacher to teach it. And there's reasons for this, so don't project, again, foreign religious ideological dogmas onto Indigenous approaches. That cannot be understood unless there's connection to the lived culture and unless one is embodied in its knowledge systems. Someone holding an etic view will misrepresent this notion of, for example, getting the teacher's blessing and inject it with the poison that comes from a certain kind of bias or conditioning from outside of the native culture. For example, often the outsider will project their religious trauma onto this idea of the guru, with the outsider imagining and believing that this must mean they give up their agency to the guru, which is completely a wrong understanding of the guru tattva, which I explained in more detail in season 1 of the podcast. The colonial mind will nevertheless continue to abuse and distort our practices so as not to address the real trauma and wounds within, so they can hide their pain behind false band-aids and keep colluding with systems of harm to hold on to external forms of power that give them illusions of control and authority in cultural practices that are not their own, possibly even for the desires of fame and fortune, which we can see in the holographic, Instagrammable world. One only has to be a sincere yoga sadhaka, an inner practitioner, for the veils of avidya to crumble and fall, and to find one's true authentic power, one's own Shakti. Shakti that heals and transforms consciousness that is corrupted by forces which disrupt Dharma, the natural order of things. Yoga is therefore a path of dismantling. Why continue the disrespect and extraction when you can be a truth seeker and discover over time the truth of your worth and wholeness already? This itself, this inner inquiry and inner search, can itself bring pause to this need to hijack and appropriate Indigenous culture. In other words, by practicing actual yoga and even learning Sanskrit, instead of doing gymnastics and perpetuating botched Sanskrit chanting learnt from fanboys, the cultural appropriator and spiritual bypasser might truly be able to take responsibility for the harm that takes place towards the living culture and its local communities. The truth is, learning Sanskrit takes years, but the colonial mind wants to digest it quickly and without reverence and sincerity because there is an agenda or payoff attached to their consumption, and it's usually to do with profit and feeding the ego, rather than for protection and upholding of truths, which has been the responsibility of its Indigenous stewards. Truths that are, by the way, under attack by the colonial Western academic institutions. Also, I will not allow my brain cells to shrink so low as to give any thought to the thoroughly debunked Aryan invasion racist theory and the projection and reframing of this colonizer mentality onto the field of Sanskrit. It's time to take that hegemonic, Eurocentric gaze from out of one's arse and bow the head either towards the light of common sense, or towards humility. As we move towards closing, I'd like to focus on some positives, and my wish is to at some point speak of the joy of my cultural heritage instead of the constant threats we face and the weight of being silenced, our culture being mocked, co-opted, diluted, and erased. So why I love learning Sanskrit. Sanskrit's complexity and depth of beauty is in a word holding multiple meanings at its root. It carries concepts which change upon contexts. It is vast and expansive and is imbued with all the meanings and possibilities that exist in the universe itself. Pronunciation is part of the discipline, especially in Vedic chanting, which must be precise. You cannot get the sounds and notes wrong within the Indigenous teaching methodology of Shruti Parampara, that is, the oral tradition, the main components of which are recitation and repetition following the teacher's lead. Continuous repetition based on listening carefully as well as maintaining a daily practice ensures you carry these divine sounds accurately and without distortion. You become a holder of the depth of meaning, and these sounds in turn purify and cleanse the body and mind. Science has shown that Sanskrit grows our brain cells and increases our memory and cognitive function. In short, Sanskrit creates embodied clarity by awakening consciousness in different parts of the body. I am so grateful to learn Sanskrit from a native teacher. It is open to all, and I will continue to learn from Indigenous teachers and sources because I strongly feel a duty to protect its true purpose in healing and liberating the self, and I value giving back to the source. I treasure both the Devanagari script and its spoken phonetics. It has given me immense Shakti and focus, and it grounds my daily reality and supports the clarity of my perception and has even strengthened my creative ability. A good resource to start understanding the biases within the Western approach to Sanskrit study, as well as the Western approach to Hindu modalities overall, is a book called Invading the Sacred, edited and authored by Krishnan Ramaswamy and others. And this is included in my Decolonial Toolkit, which you can download for free. Another good place to start your learning is the Sanskrit channel on YouTube. It's a fantastic and accessible source of authentic knowledge. Support Indigenous teachers and their offerings, center their voices, and be part of our collective healing and transformation. Rise up, warrior. Hey, it's Payal. In the description box below, you'll find my Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit. Download it for more resources like these and begin your unlearning journey so you can choose your next teachers or sources of dharmic knowledge and practices more wisely and start learning from the emic view of culture from within Indigenous frameworks of understanding.